I've been asked a couple of times how I feel about the potential of what you're doing here. And I have to say that one of the reasons I'm enthusiastic and hopeful for you is the fellow that you just heard speaking to you this morning. It's very rare to find someone, the head of education, who actually has worked at it hard. In my country, we appoint a lot of people, and I just hold my head like this as I listen to them talk about education. I want to talk to you today about the role. Oh yes, I have to warn you, the title that's in the program has nothing to do whatsoever with what I'm going to talk about. I want to begin by telling you why I feel a sense of urgency about this. This is a diagram I picked up from Peter Scholtes, who tells me he stole it from Malcolm Knowles. At the top, I'm showing you over the last 2 centuries what has happened to human lifespan. We now live a lot longer than our ancestors did. The human lifespan in the 1700s was up 50 years, 40 years. I'm 77, been talking with my doctor, told him I really was shooting for 100, and he said, the data say you can go to 115. And if I can keep him alive, I'm going to make it. Below that, I've indicated the lifespan of technology. Back around 1700, you could learn from your grandfather what you needed to know to hold a job and to deal with the technology. But it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And those of you who own computers know exactly what I mean. The technology is moving rapidly, but I could have put below that line, I could have put a lot of other things: social institutions, political relations. The world around us is changing at a dizzying pace. I have to also say that you have received in your booklet a disc that contains all that I have here. So you needn't try to take good notes. These diagrams are all available to you on that diskette. Life is changing at a terrible pace, and we have to understand why that is. There are forces for change worldwide, and the population explosion. We may know in theory what to do about it, but no one knows what to do about it. There is general resource depletion. There are rising expectations around the world. There are interdependent economies. Do I have to explain that to you now? Money flows around the world at the speed of light. We now have electronic funds transfer, and it's possible for someone to make a decision in London, and $1 billion can move somewhere else in the world like that. Right? We also have uncertain supplies in that we all import to stay alive. No one can go it alone, and we're not always certain that the things we want or we need are going to be there because of political unrest. There's an increasing disparity between the rich and the poor, and that's creating social tensions, and that too is a source of change. And there's more. But this says to us that our children will be living in a world in which the rate of change is even greater than it is now. And when we talk about what we're doing in education, our task is to prepare the next generation to become continuous learners, to be involved in permanent education. We have to create in them a yearning for learning. That has to be the primary aim of education. If you don't do that, you cannot expect, as adults, the children that we're educating today, to be enthusiastic learners. Instead, they will react, they will withdraw, they will become passive observers, becoming more and more frightened at the world around them. An educational system that kills the thirst for knowledge is a menace to the survival of society. Now, if yesterday's knowledge is not enough, the question is, what should we teach? Or more importantly, what should our students learn? I want to make that distinction clear. Teaching is when I show you how I solve a problem. Learning is when you figure out how to solve your problem. And so the focus must always be on learning. Learning to learn is the most important lesson that we can pass on to the next generation. Learning to learn. That doesn't come naturally. That's a part of a cultural transmission. Now, I painted a dark picture of this world. Let me tell you, there are two important developments that promise us a significant way to meet the challenge. The first comes from brain research. And I'm going to introduce you to some of the aspects of that because it is not well enough known. It's called cognitive modifiability. You see, your brain has a mind of its own, and you try to get it to do something, and it doesn't always do what you want it to do. And you reason by the use of what are called cognitive structures. Next week I'll be visiting Professor Silverstein in Swinburne University here, who is doing some very important work in which you can actually see cognitive structures being formed in the brain as people learn. And there's theoretical work that I'm going to come to you in a moment, going to discuss in a moment, in which we are learning how to take those ideas and use them in a very direct way to change the learning patterns of people. I've been through it myself, and I've had that experience, and I've worked with other people, and I'll come to that. That isn't the only thing, though. There's one other development, quality management, which changes the way we work with collections of human brains. In other words, we have two problems that I see in education. One is to affect individual brains, to affect the way they learn, to make people better at learning. And the other is how we use all of those brains collectively to do the things that we can only do collectively. That's what management should be all about, management and leadership. And so I'm going to be talking about cognitive modifiability and quality management. But I'm going to leave to David Langford the bulk of the discussion about the application of quality management in education. We've decided on that division of labor. These two developments are synergistic. You need both. We need to have both in place to succeed. Now let me start a brief overview of structural cognitive modifiability. That's a long word, a long phrase to discuss what we know and how we know how to use it about the brain and the way it functions and the way we use it. It's a different kind of organ than all the other organs in the body. This is a picture of what the heavens look like over this southern hemisphere. They tell me there's a Southern Cross in there. I don't know, do you see it? Anybody see the Southern Cross? A lot of you are nodding yes. I come from the Northern Hemisphere. I have never seen this Southern Cross, literally. If you look to a telescope, which narrows your field of view, then it's easier. And I still had trouble seeing the Southern Cross. Michael King showed me where to draw the lines. Okay, imagine you're out there in the evening. You got me up there at night, and you say, look, Myron, there's a Southern Cross. And I say, where? Right up there. And I don't see it. Well, look, it's right there. How do you teach somebody to see the Southern Cross in that that picture I showed you earlier, with all those lights up there? How do you do it? What do you tell them? I can't see it. You can see it. I can't see it. Let me ask you a different question. Is there really a Southern Cross up there? No. Do you realize what you told me? You can see something that isn't there. I can't see it, and you think I'm the one that needs help. What's going on? That is, you did it with your brain without even thinking, right? In the same way that you recognize your mother's face without stopping to think. I want to explore that with you a bit. Here you see I've drawn a square and two triangles in one of those panels. And alongside of it, I think most of you can recognize a square and two triangles. Have any trouble? Don't have any trouble. How about the next panel? Can you find a square and two triangles? It's not too hard. You're doing it. Not everybody. Most of you are doing it. And even in the last panel, it's a little more complicated, isn't it? Just a little hard. Well, let me give you something really to work on. Now, I'm not really interested in whether you can find the square and the two triangles. I'm interested in whether you understand yourself how you're using your brain to do it. I'm going to leave it there for a few minutes, and I would not for about a minute or so. I'm going to ask you to explain to the person alongside of you how you do it. If you can. You may not be able to do that last one. If you can, I've got some you'll have trouble with. The issue now is for you to develop an awareness of what you're doing with your brain when you put it to a task like this. And so let me just stop. I've got a little wristwatch here, and I'm going to take a minute, and you talk to each other about it, because as you explain it to each other, you begin to understand it better. Now may if I can have your attention back. A lot of people, for example, sort of stare at it until the square pops up. In other words, they do it without thinking. And we do a lot of things without thinking. We turn almost on autopilot. We allow and we do a tremendous amount of things without being consciously aware. However, if that's the way you do things, and a lot of students in school are working that way, they have memorized, they've learned to recognize the situation and respond to it without thinking. And that's okay, I suppose, until you get to a point where it isn't working. At which time, you need to become aware of what you're doing in order to take command, to get off autopilot, if you will. A while back, I asked you about the Southern Cross, and we had a little fun with that. Now, the Southern Cross and the Big Dipper and the various constellations were invented years and years ago, go back 1,000 years. Now, there isn't a Southern Cross. There isn't a square there. You are imposing on what is a confusing set of input information. You are imposing your mental concept of a square on that in order to make sense of it. That's what you do. That's what our brain is doing, taking concepts and using them to organize the incoming information which would otherwise be confusing. And navigators did that. In other words, they could, for a purpose, organize something that would be disorganized and make sense out of it. Where else in life do you do that? Where else? And the answer is everywhere. All of learning consists of developing concepts and associating them with incoming information in order to make sense out of it. When we invent a name for a behavior pattern in psychology, we are taking what would seem odd, It bothers us. We give it a name. Now we can talk with somebody else about it, recognize it when it happens again. And we do that in all of learning. And now, structural cognitive modifiability was developed by Reuven Feuerstein in Israel, and he's been at it for a little over 50 years, about 55 years now. It really begins with the work of Piaget and Vygotsky. Vygotsky in the Soviet Union had a lot of ideas about learning. Piaget had ideas about learning. And Feuerstein has built on that. The basic theory starts with this postulate that the brain is infinitely plastic. We have billions of neurons, and no one knows the limit of what can be done in the interconnections of those neurons to create structures which we can call upon later. We use to transfer experience from one situation to another. What we call learning is the ability to learn, to extract from experience something that we can retain in our heads and use either when that happens again, or more importantly, we say abstract learning, we can translate that to another situation. That's what education is all about, to help people to develop abstract structures that they can use in new situations, to deal with new situations. Thinking involves the use of these structures. And until I saw the work of, over here at Swinburne, I'm going to be visiting there next week, until I understood that work, I was in this position saying, he talks about structures, but I don't know, maybe there's something else going on. But then when I saw what you can see on the scope and what you can see going on when a person is doing something, this idea of a structure comes to life. Furthermore, the more you read in brain research, the more you see these structures are very real, because when they do experiments with animals, they can go in and pinpoint exactly where they are. Learning disability is caused by dysfunctional or absent structures. Learning consists of creating those structures, and when you meet a child who comes from a different culture, or comes from some part of our society where the child has been subject to abuse or drugs, or if you meet somebody who's had brain injury or even a heart attack, it often happens that structures are either destroyed or they're not there. And now this theory says it doesn't matter what was the cause. We can fix it. It is true that if you have enough difficulty, then it's a lot more work to fix it. But all of us have some little area of dysfunction. Here I am, 77 years old. I and I've been in education 50 years, a doctorate, all kinds of research and everything. And I go through this course, and I discover certain areas in which my structures are inadequate, and I become aware of them. And it isn't until I become aware of them that can be changed. You can't change my structures. I can't change yours. You can change yours, but only when you become aware. And part of the teaching learning process, and particularly when you use cognitive modifiability as a basis, part of that, the essence of it is to develop your awareness of it. And through what we call the LPAD, the Learning Propensity Assessment Device, we can find out if something is missing or dysfunctional and help you to fix it. I'm recent to this. I've only been at it 3 years, and I don't feel I know I'm not as skillful as the people who teach me who've been at it for a dozen years, but I had my first success with a young teacher the other day, and I'm very pleased with it because it was working and everything went the way it should. We had about 6 hours together total, maybe 8, I can't recall now. Her problem was she moved from another state to California, and to be allowed to teach, she had to take a special examination that all teachers have to pass to be allowed. And she has a thing about mathematics. She's always felt she was no good at math, and they call it mathophobia. She face her with a math exam and she starts to shake. And she flunked. And this is very serious, her career. And I know her brother, and one thing and another, she came to see me. And we had some sessions together. Now, I didn't spend time teaching her mathematics. What I did was use this technique to explore with her how she's using her brain and to help her to understand it. And she emailed me about 2 weeks ago and said, I think I passed, and more importantly, she talked about how she had approached the task in a different way that reflected directly what we did. Whatever the reasons, structures can be modified. Here's a picture of a soldier in the Israeli army. He was born a Down syndrome child. Now, Feuerstein, using his assessment methods, worked with Down syndrome children and concluded that their brains were as good as anybody else's. Now, you know, Down syndrome is caused by chromosome damage. And what it does is change the shape of the head and the eyes. Also, it makes the tongue too large for the cavity. And Down syndrome children have great difficulty speaking. They often make just guttural noises. And as a result of being unable to speak and looking weird, they have made other people feel that probably their brain wasn't any good either. And because they couldn't speak, and because of that, many of the cognitive functions that would develop in a normal child simply don't get developed. So they have great difficulty, and it's a terrible tragedy when you meet a couple that, say, in their middle 50s, and they've got a 22-year-old Down syndrome son, and they're worried what's going to happen to him when they die. And that's and so forth. This young man has had considerable change, and you have to come up close to him to see the ears and the area around the neck where his face and head have been adjusted. And also the tongue is shortened. Now, those children were given special enrichment by Feuerstein and his staff to make up for what had happened to them along the way, and then they have been put into the regular classes, and they are normal. Some of them have gone to the head of the class. I have been to Israel, and I've met these youngsters. I've met that, so I took that picture of that boy and his girlfriend. I have met these Down syndrome youngsters, and I'm impressed. When you see 20 of them on the stage acting in a play which is designed to portray to the rest of us what it is like to be locked in the body of a Down syndrome child and treated the way we treat them. Okay? This is powerful stuff. Well, that's one success. Here's another one which is very exciting to me. This is a picture of Alex. And on your right, the chap on your right has only half a brain. Alex, at the age of 2, was discovered to start to have epileptic fits and problems like that, and the doctors went in and discovered there was a tumor, and they removed it, but in the process they removed the right half of his brain. Alex didn't begin to speak, or everybody said that, you know, we've got him alive, but he's never going to amount to anything, and he didn't speak. At 9 years of age, he started to babble a little bit and started to speak. His mother was thrilled. She tried to get people to help, and they all said you can't. There were a lot of psychologists who would like to have him as a laboratory instrument animal to study, but they said, don't give up. We mustn't encourage the mother, but she wouldn't give up. I met her. I had lunch with her one day. Well, when I met Alex, he was 14, and I didn't know there was any problem with him. And we talked, just back and forth. I thought he was kind of a flighty teenager, and I'm used to that. Then the second year I met him, He was learning to read, write, and speak Hebrew. He was born in Wales. It's not his native tongue. He's not Jewish. Then last July, when I was with him, he was helping to teach some of the Down syndrome children, functioning on half a brain. It was necessary to build back the cognitive structures that he didn't have. And a lot of things that we know for sure about the brain, about the left brain, right brain, and all that, it's not so clear anymore in my mind that that's the way things really are. We have a conceptual framework that we impose on the data that come to us, and if the data don't fit, well, my gosh, we better reject the data rather than change our conceptual framework. This is called paradigm shift. Right? Well, I want to move on. In Taunton, Massachusetts, there is a school district where some people were trained with Feuerstein, and they decided to put it into the entire school. And so here you see the results of that work. They started about 1986, and in 1988, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts decided to institute testing for all school districts. And what I show here is the yellow band, which is sort of the broad band of the bulk of schools in Massachusetts, and the data points are from Taunton. And in the social sciences, the work improved enormously. In reading, it went up. In math, it went up. In fact, the enormous gains on problem-solving ability. Now, the ability of a child to take a strange situation, make sense of it, and figure out what to do. That was the greatest gain, because that is the thing that we focus on in cognitive modifiability, in this kind of work. We work mostly on helping people to develop structures. And, of course, they did well in science. But you're not going to get this in the schools if you continue to manage schools the way they are. The teachers cannot change what they do if the way we evaluate their work, the way we evaluate them, the way we look at the children, the way we organize the curriculum, the way we do all of those things makes it extremely difficult to introduce these techniques. You can do it, but you're certainly not going to get the benefits. So now David is going to talk more about quality management. I want to talk about it at a certain level. I'll talk about it at a more theoretical level, if you will, and he's going to talk about it at a practical level. The way I define what a teacher's job is this. The students are learning in a system. The teacher's job is to work on the system to improve it continuously with their help. Now that's a different idea of being a teacher. A lot of myths about learning we need to get rid of. Learning is not enjoyable. If the students are enjoying it, they mustn't be learning much. All right? Serious learning occurs only in isolation. You got to be sitting by yourself, and if possible, in competition with somebody else. If more students are achieving, then the standards must be getting lower. This is very important. That whole nonsense about the bell curve in that book about it is all based on this kind of mythology, and it does a lot of damage. More myths. Students must be enticed to achieve. Without rewards or threats, students will set low standards and will take the easy path. People believe that. And that underlying belief gets in the way of doing the things we need to do to make people into independent learners. To get them to take charge, we have to give them freedom to do things. Oh, but if you do that, I can't let my kids do that because they'll just goof off. And there's a proper school look. Teachers are teaching and students are passively listening. Everybody knows that. This is what I mean by joy in learning. For me, quality in education is joy in learning. When I say joy in learning, I don't mean listening to music or having lots of things to eat or running around and recess and all that. No, I mean that existential pleasure that comes when you dig into a subject and you get it, and you know you've got it, and you don't have to get anybody else to tell you. You know you've got it. You get that on the sports field. If you're a basketball player, you learn how to do that hook shot, and you see it go in, and after that, nobody has to tell you. And and David will talk with you more about this, the important ingredient is for the student to learn what it means to do something superbly well, and then prove to himself or herself that it's happened. And then they're delighted in telling other people. If education doesn't consist of experiences like that, it's a terrible education. How much have I run over time? Oh, good. 20 minutes over? Oh, how delightful. Yeah, I got another hour's worth. In the United States, the Secretary of Labor commissioned a report which is now known as the SCANS report, and that stands for the Secretary's Commission on the Acquisition of Necessary Skills. This report was put together by a lot of people in industry who said, answered the question, what are you looking for when you hire people? Now, when I first saw that, I was not too happy because I didn't know what they would come up with, and I just had this image of, well, we want obedient people who punch the time clock. Knowing how to learn, knowing how to reason. You see, leaders of modern industry that have a chance of surviving realize that now they do not need passive order takers. They need people who are active problem solvers, because without them, the company can't survive. There's a change in the view. If you go back and see Charlie Chaplin's movie, Modern Times, that was the view that we had of what was required on it. This is what Ford put the assembly line together. Shut up and think and do. If I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. That sort of thing. That's gone. What they're asking for are characteristics you really want in any aspect of life, not just working in industry. They want personal qualities such as responsibility, self-esteem, sociability, integrity, self-managed. The big advantage that I was told the Japanese had over us was when it was time to teach, to introduce a new technology, they could hand a book to an employee and say, here, read the instruction manual and go learn to use it. And we set up a course. That's expensive. The SCANS report, additional companies, resources, the ability to allocate time to manage your money, materials, space, and staff. Right? You need that to be a homemaker. Interpersonal capabilities, working in teams, teaching others, serving customers, leading, negotiating, working well with people of diverse backgrounds. This came to the schools out of industry. And what a wonderful report it was. Information, acquiring, evaluating, organizing, maintaining files, interpreting, communicating, using computers to organize, and so on. Finally, systems, understanding social systems, organizational, technological systems, monitoring, correcting, improving, and in technology, selecting equipment, tools, applying technologies to tasks, maintaining, troubleshooting. Well, the computer is a wonderful device for that, especially the part about troubleshooting. Now, when we try to put a curriculum together, we try to decide what to include. I discern in looking at across the field, I discern three distinct schools of thought. And you'll know by the time you get to the end which one I like best. One of them comes from an outfit we have in the United States. It's typical. It's called the Core Knowledge Foundation. They will publish a book such as What Your Sixth Grader Should Know. And this is all across the United States. I see the states are adopting various ways of addressing that issue, either standardized tests or reports of committees or commissions that say, by age 10, these are the things in elementary algebra youngsters should begin to learn, or whatever. They, this is what you know about history, mathematics, science, social science. It's all laid out at every age, all organized. And in my book, that comes under the heading of what David Bumstead, the comic strip, has said. He said, that makes a lot of sense if you don't think about it. And I'll show you why that fails. That doesn't mean people won't try harder. Insanity is continuing to do, having lost all sense of direction, just try harder. Joel Barker has felt that there's something wrong with that. One of the things that's wrong with that is kids don't make much sense out of it. As someone has said, it's like giving somebody a jigsaw puzzle and never showing them a picture on the top of the box. And there's no motivation for this. You just study all these bits and pieces. And so school becomes an exercise in which you study whatever they tell you to study, and you get a good grade. Because if you get a good grade, you can go to the next level and do it all over again. And you keep doing that until you get to college. And then you get out of college, then you go to work. Then you have to figure out how it all comes, and with luck, maybe it'll happen. Like waiting for the figures in the dots to appear. The EFG curriculum, E for environment, F for future, G for global. What he has done is to say, we're going to put the students to work on projects. They will have a project dealing with the environment. But in order to solve it, they'll have to go into science, economics, political science, and so on. And futures. Ask the question, what do you want life to be like in the future? When you grow up, how do you want the world to be? Well, to study that, you have to study the past. So you have to study history, you can study political science, you can study technology. You can look at things in historical perspective in order to extrapolate. And if you want to talk about global economy, in other words, by developing each of these three topics, you can show how all the basic core knowledge things can be linked together, but this time in a more purposeful way. And so you have, there are schools now on this program. They're very excited about what they're doing. In every case, I get the Core Knowledge Foundation, I get their newsletter, and they describe the schools that are doing this and how enthusiastic the teachers and their kids, everybody is about what they're doing. They have sample curricula, sample lesson plans, and so forth. And some are very creative and it's kind of exciting. And the same thing is true of the EFG Curriculum Collaborative. They have schools, they're doing it. And the projects are on those themes. I'm communicating with a fellow by the name of Marion Brady down in Florida. Down in Florida, I don't know. Down. It reminds me of a test we use in the cognition area, cognitive modifiability. We show a youngster a picture of an astronaut standing on the moon. And he's looking back at the Earth. It's beautiful. I mean, there's an astronaut in the foreground, and the surface of the moon, and the blue Earth in a black background. And you say to the student, which way is down? Look at that picture and tell me which way is down. And that requires you to project your mind somewhere else and see it in a different way, walk in the other fellow's footsteps as well, right? There's a whole series of cognitive functions required to answer that question. Anyway, in Florida, down in Florida from where I live, Myron Brady has been pushing for the last 40 years on what he calls the supra-disciplinary approach, which is based on the idea that you really shouldn't be teaching these disciplines at all, but rather you should have the students begin to try to make sense of the life around them. Let me give you an example. You have your daughter, son, going to study history. First thing you're going to do is answer this question: how did your grandmother and grandfather meet and decide to get married? What were the circumstances of their life and living at that time? What did the people amongst whom they lived believe? What was going on in the world at that time when they decided? And if possible, interview them, ask them, maybe even ask them about their parents, what they can remember. So we begin to see history as a confluence of many things that we talk about in social science. And Myron Brady has kinds of questions that he suggests the kids should learn to ask. Who were they? How old were they? What did they believe? What was going on around them? What kind of specific actions were they taking? What was the geography like where they lived? It was in the middle of the city and so on. To get the feeling of the times as it's seen. And now with that kind of thread, you can keep going back in history, and but you don't just study history, you study all kinds of things that are going on. And if you do that over a period of 10 years, different levels, you will have covered most of the things that we try to cover in the social sciences, and they'll all be meaningful to you. And that's the whole point. And I'm going to leave that now, David, to pick up. Pre-packaging information doesn't work. And I will show you videotape called Minds of Our Own, and let me just say a few words about it, because not everybody's going to come to my session. Harvard University and the Annenberg Foundation made a study to understand what is going on with this problem of taking what you learned in school and then doing something with it in real life. And in one of these videotapes, you see the following scene. I taught at MIT for 12 and a half years, so I know something about the place, and it's genuine. This scene opens with a young man, a valedictorian at the graduation exercises, explaining, as he says, with all modesty, that MIT is the greatest engineering school in the world. They teach everything there except humility. And then you see these seniors in cap and gown, and the interviewer walks up to one of them and holds out a piece of a tree, log about that big around, that long. Says, here, take this, and the student is holding it, and he says, that's mostly made of carbon, isn't it? The student says, yes. Where does the carbon come from? And there's silence. The student looks blank, and he said, well, it's got all that carbon. It grew. Where'd it come from? Did it come out of the ground? Yeah, probably. The fact that that student had taken a course in maybe photosynthesis and knows about how sunlight and grass grows from carbon dioxide in the air and all that, doesn't register. Student after student after student couldn't answer that question. Or walk up to a student, cap and gown, MIT, now they didn't do this with students of electrical engineering. I think we got a different answer, but anyway, other students, hand this girl, just got her degree in biochemistry, hand her a flashlight battery, a bulb from a flashlight and a piece of wire and say, can you use these to light that bulb? And you could not. Or you take high school students studying chemistry and ask them some questions which would involve the application of that chemistry knowledge to their life situation. They have the foggiest notion. And in one scene you see this chemistry teacher who is known as an excellent teacher. And he's holding his hands in his head like this. My God, I told them, I taught them. That's right, he taught them. They didn't learn, he taught them. Pre-packaging, it doesn't work. Now, there is another research project done by my friend David Hestenes in Arizona State University, where students are brought into the university as freshmen, and before they take the elementary physics, Newtonian physics about forces and masses and springs and all that, they're interviewed to understand how they think, what's their mental framework for ideas about force and mass and gravity and so on. Right? Then they take the course. They pass the course. Then they are interviewed to find out if their conceptual framework has changed. And 40% of them are unchanged. Nothing happened. Their image of the world is the same. They might as well not have taken that course. Based on that, he is changing the way they teach. He's organized a consortium of teachers across America and is working at that. But the point is, both of those studies show that pre-packaging information, teaching students what we know, transferring our mental images to their heads, hoping they will form those mental images and make connections to the outside world, that doesn't work. And I was shocked to read that. I know of no educator who looks at that film who doesn't get a shock. What does work? Well, classical projects, good students projects, they have a mental image. They do something. Then they, in other words, they have an experience, and then they go around that cycle, and they're unchanged. But if someone intervenes in the way of a mediator or a moderator to help them when they start the experience and to engage them in discussion about what happened, then there's a chance to change the conceptual framework. It's terribly important that they not have unexamined life. This is shown up in Feuerstein's work. See, Skinner had the idea that there'd be a stimulus and an organism, and it would give a response. And the teacher, 5 minutes. The teacher had, good, your timing is excellent. The teacher has the responsibility to put various stimuli in front of the learner and look at the response, and if it isn't right, try other stimuli and go around and around that cycle. And that's teaching. And Piaget said the teacher should get out of the way. So children in the Montessori school do a lot of playing around with blocks and so forth and laying them together until they get the concept of area being the product of length and width and things like that. And the teacher playing a very low role. Feuerstein says, no, that's not the way to do it. You can see there in blue a little H. That is a human being who intervenes in various stages of the process, the input where you take in the stimuli and the output when you make your response, and also during the processing of the data. And that human being helps the person to deal with the stimulus and to deal with the response. And this is what a good parent does. A good parent interacts with the child when the child is trying to do something, or when the child is actually making a response, and helping to give meaning to it all, helping to generalize it all. For example, one of the cognitive functions that we have enables us to place ourselves in time. There are children who don't get that help. So for them, there is no future because they don't have a sense of time. And then they exhibit all kinds of behavior patterns. Got to have it right now. Because when you say, wait, you can have it later, they can't, there's no later for them. There's no time. But a parent does this sometimes without realizing. Mother says to the little girl, well, you remember we were at Aunt Edna's last Tuesday, and we said we would go to the zoo tomorrow. Well, we're going to do that tomorrow. We have to get ready for it. Or when I was a little girl, I did so-and-so, and now you're doing it. All kinds of references to time, placing itself in time, until the child begins to understand there is a tomorrow. There was a yesterday. That is not automatic, right? And when you deal with a dog, you don't even think about talking to the dog about tomorrow. This is called mediation, mediated learning experience. Everybody learns from experience. What they learn from experience depends on how the experience is mediated. And that mediation helps you to form cognitive structures. So Feuerstein has provided us with a map to help us to reason about these cognitive structures. What Brady is saying, he has a map to use in reasoning about things outside your head and how to interact with those things in such a way that you build your own cognitive structures. Both men are looking at education primarily as the building of these structures, with the belief that as you do that, you will find it so easy to acquire the particular knowledge that comes about almost automatically. Modern education, as I see it, is built on the idea that you give people pre-digested things to get, and they get it in their head somehow, and when it's in there, the necessary cognitive structures for connecting to life will somehow automatically be made. And it isn't working, and it might have been adequate for an era in which the rate of change was so slow that you could do that. And we can't do it anymore. We can't do that to our children. Ivan Webb is one of the people he's in Tasmania who has grasped these ideas. We met last year. I'm going to visit him next week in Launceston. He has put these things to work, and he said a number of things. He said the cost of rework is enormous. Children who should have learned but didn't in the first time, children who don't learn, whose self-esteem goes down, who become behavior problems. In his view, 10% of the children account for 90% of the cost in running a school. And that the very best students don't cost, they pay. When you got them in a school, they do so many good things for you, they're reducing your cost. The teachers have said, following many of the ideas that Ivan got from David, we don't have the problems we used to have. Quality principles do not require substantial change to put them in effect, other than in your head and in the process. So you don't require reorganization, you don't require new positions and things like that. Until everything is happening as it should, resources are not your limiting factor. I hate to tell you, most people feel, we're going to go to college, I need additional money. You don't. What you need to do is to stop the waste, and then you find the resources to do what you need to do. If you're a teacher, you should start applying quality methods right in your classes, now, tomorrow. If you're a principal, you should apply quality methods in your school. If you're a superintendent or administration, apply it to your tasks. It all starts with you. I have put on the, without leadership, nothing happens. A leader persuades people to do things they would not otherwise do. And I was delighted when I heard your speaker this morning, because that's leadership in action. Without that, with that, you're going places. The leader takes people to places they wouldn't go by themselves, and creates new systems within which people can achieve the goals that they and the leader aspire to. If you go to the diskette that you got, you'll find this paper completed. If you go to this particular website, you will find a series of essays that I've prepared on various aspects of quality in education, including some done with David. Well, now it's up to you. Thank you.